that really makes me feel like life has been worth living. For me, that's like a little birthday present every time it happens.
Alrighty, Terrie Lloyd, thank you for joining me today. So Terrie is the CEO of, well, started many companies in Japan, and now currently I want to say 4 companies up and running right now.
Yeah, well, it's a matter of opinion, yes. But right at the moment, I'm running 4 that are fully registered here in Japan.
Okay, great. So the obvious question for me and my audience is like, how did you get started as an entrepreneur, and what led you to Japan?
I'm kind of like a weed in the sidewalk. So what does that mean? It means that the weed seed grows wherever it lands. And I didn't go to university. I left school at 16. I worked for an electronics company. Somehow I managed to get to Australia from New Zealand. I worked for a computer company. And then I've been in a computer and technology business ever since. But I've expanded that into content in various fields that, interest me. So I guess I'm not sure exactly why I like that space, because actually I'm not naturally good at anything. I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none. Actually, the thing I'm good at is recognizing other people's skills and then co-opting and getting them involved in our businesses and working together in partnership and that kind of thing. That's probably my best thing. I am good at telling the future, and I'm quite good at intercepting 5, 10 years from now. When I first got started, it was frustrating because it would take years for industry and the trends to catch up. But recently, in the last 10 years or so, I got much better at it. And so, as a result, I get lucky more frequently.
Okay, well, I don't know if that's a function of practice or being able to read
Yeah,
the
it's a
future.
function of practice and also being aware of my own shortcomings. At the beginning, you think you can do everything, as you end your career, or I'm not quite at the end yet, but getting there, you start to realize that, you can't do everything. And you also learn to factor in the stuff that you don't expect. So in the 40 years I've been here in Japan, I've been through at least 3 crises, uh, 2 of which affected me greatly. One was, of course, the Lehman shock. I would say the one before that was the year 2000 problem, and then the earthquake in Tohoku. And those 3 things really affected me and affected my life and how I viewed life. I went from thinking about money and growth and, fame and fortune to basically how to make a difference in society and to be impactful and meaningful.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a good thing, actually. I mean, the rough edges sort of got worn off a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I've found that in my life too. Of course, when I was younger, it was how many I work as a lawyer mostly full time, and I used to think, okay, how many hours do I need to bill before I can get that car or that new TV or new house or whatever? And now it's more like it's about stability, and I'm not really mentoring new lawyers. I don't work directly with them, but I do take the chance to, when I recognize talent, to kind of help lift that person up and kind of give them you know a kind of a push and encouragement.
To that car thing, which I think is a great example. Um, my debate internally is always, do I take a car or do I get exercise?
Yeah.
So, and usually exercise wins. So, so the car just sits there. Um, and then for mentoring, yeah, for at least the last 10 years, I've had a strong pay it back mentality and servant leadership mentality. So on the pay it back side, I do a lot of public speaking and motivational speaking for young people who are getting started.
Mm,
Um, Anybody that I meet, I give them my name card and I invite them to contact me years later, for advice or counseling or whatever it is that they want to talk about.
mm,
So, in a given week, maybe 3 to 5 people will contact me. Oh, you probably don't remember me. We met 10 years ago. This is going on. Can you give me some feedback or advice? And
mm.
that really makes me feel like life has been worth living. For me, that's like a little birthday present every time it happens. Yeah. So this morning I spoke to a business. Actually, they're a business school from the States, and they want to know how Japanese think. Now, if you hear a Japanese tell you how Japanese think, they get it through a Japanese prism. When you're non-Japanese and you have to deal with the way Japanese think, you can create a whole different mindset and a whole different viewpoint. And interestingly, there were a couple of young Japanese kids in that group, and they were asking some really great questions. So I can tell that they're going to carry on this kind of line of thinking and be more critical of their own society and their own values, which is great.
Very good, very good. Yeah. So, with the travel industry, there was a lot going on. I had business trips scheduled to Korea. I was helping somebody get a visa for India, and then everything just shut down. So, what a time to be in the travel industry.
Yeah, well, I got lucky, right? I got lucky plus 10 years. So actually, what happened is that in 2011, of course, we had the earthquake, and then, we're all worried about cesium falling with the rain. I don't know if you remember, but after the nuclear power stations blew up, the local TV stations were running programs on how not to get cesium in your hair while you were outside coming back from work.
Mm,
And so, all these people were walking around with rubber galoshes and umbrellas and stuff on that one day when the wind turned south and brought the cesium down into Tokyo. Luckily for us, the prevailing winds mostly were out to sea, so it wasn't really a big deal in the end. But that was kind of weird, like you tune in to the TV, click through the stations, and they're all talking about cesium and how to protect yourself. That's a
mm,
bit out there. So when that happened, of course, about 520,000 foreign residents fled the country, including my tenants, actually, who left clothes on the floor because they're in such a hurry to get out the door.
mm,
So they were French, and they were told by the French embassy, "You've got to get out now. We have a plane. We're going to evacuate you. If you're not on that plane, you're stuck in Japan with, and the inference being you'll die of radiation." Uh, I actually had people calling me from Australia and New Zealand telling me to get out. But, I had staff. And how would it look if I ran away? My employees, that would be terrible. It's like somebody on the front line running away and leaving their soldiers behind. So I decided to be careful and try to keep cesium out of my hair. And of course, my business melted down literally in front of me because all my customers were leaving. And I had an epiphany. Actually, I had a dream. My long dead grandfather came to me in my dream and said, "Well, Terry, you got all these problems, but things will get better." And he said to me, "Share everything." And I woke up, and of course, he said a bunch of other things. So, of course, it might be an overactive imagination, which is fine. But anyway, I wrote it down, and I came up with a model for creating a community for promoting online content. And I had 2 things that I wanted to do. One was dogs, because I've always had a dog, thanks to my wife. And then the other thing was travel. And why travel? Because it's the worst industry to be in until 2011. Absolutely the worst. So fast forward a couple of years, Abe comes in and yen gets really weak because it used to be really strong. And suddenly people start discovering Japan again. So in 2013 in November, I formed JapanTravel.com. And then I went out and started doing sales. And my client prospects were saying to me, foreigners aren't coming to Japan. We've just been through radiation scare and everything else. You're crazy. So, yeah, it was hard work for the first 3 or 4 years. By 2016, 2017, pretty obvious that something amazing was going on. And, in 2011, when we first did this, there were 6.5 million people came to Japan. In 2019, 32 million.
Okay.
That's 500% increase in that sector. And now we're almost back at 30 million again now. So yes, there was this speed bump called COVID. And during that speed bump for 2.5 years, I had 50 people I had to support with very little help from the government. But we made it. And so now, things are really booming. The business is very strong, is growing strongly. And certainly we're hoping there's not another COVID for at least another 2 or 3 years. But, one thing you can count on in Japan, there's always something unexpected around the corner.
Mm.
So, so basically, certainly travel is the right place to be, but I can tell you it wasn't a simple
Mm-hmm.
path. It was quite convoluted.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the pictures of the koalas of cherry blossoms behind me. I was there last week, and a lot of visitors. A lot of people who didn't speak
Yeah.
Japanese, and I do YouTube as in addition to the podcast, and I put out cherry blossom videos, and I get lots of comments. When is this place going to bloom, and when is this place going to bloom, and what are the best places to go? So I try to put out that information as best I can, but uh, social media's got all, and I joke a lot about the oversaturated pictures, the bright neon pink cherry blossom pictures people put out, but it's all fun. But I do see when I'm in Shibuya, I see a lot of visitors, a lot of foreigners, and
Yeah, more than half,
yeah,
including Mark Zuckerberg, right? He
right.
was here last week,
Mhm.
apparently.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep. So, and Elon Musk was here before that, and then lots of other visitors. But um, the weak yen, and then of course the uniqueness of Japan, the popularity of manga, anime. Now there's the new Shogun movie coming out.
Yeah, right. I saw that.
I think there's a lot of interest in Japan, and so beautiful time to be in travel, and beautiful time to come here. It's going to be an awesome year. But kind of switching gears here, if I can ask what you can tell me as far as seeing the future, and we discussed the weak yen, and I don't know how much of a long-term effect this will have. I don't really follow the Bank of Japan and how interest rates influence exchange rates, and I don't really understand that FX industry very well. But
Mm.
as far as abandoned homes, Akia, I read a book by a Swedish guy, Anton Warman. I hope I'm saying that right, but I went to meet him in person, and I have people contact me all the time because I'm a lawyer, U.S. lawyer working in Japan. Have people contact me all the time saying, "Hey, I want to buy a house in Japan," and
Yeah.
I know there are several books out on it, a couple in English, a lot in Japanese. But as far as the what the industry, I think the word Akia is becoming English now.
Yeah, it is. In fact, you say Akia to Japanese, and they kind of, you have to explain to them what you're talking about because it's not necessarily a well-known term, although, we're getting that reverse information flow back into Japanese where they're talking about all these foreigners being interested in Akia. Oh, what's Akia? And then they explain their own word to their own people. Yeah. Yeah. Empty house, of course, is what it actually means. But yeah, so in about a week's time, we will be launching a website called Akia 2. And that is a tip of the hat to all the pioneers who got started. So, I've been thinking about Akia, honestly, for about 7 or 8 years, and I actually pulled the trigger on my first purchase in 2019. But of course, the timing wasn't great. and it was a choice between spending money on an Akia or helping my company to survive. So I just put everything on hold, and as a result, I lost, well, 3 years. But I did finally pull the trigger last year. I joined forces with a young guy from Singapore who lives in Japan, Lester. He is fluent trilingual. He has a master's degree in architecture, and he worked doing renovations for a Japanese architectural firm for the last 4 years.
Right.
So I kind of approached him and said, hey, why don't we join forces? And so he's come on board. We bought our first two houses, and they're beautiful places. One is up on a sort of like a promontory overlooking rice paddies going down to the ocean. And it's actually a well-known tourist attraction. It's called San Maida, which is in Ishikawa-ken. The other one is on the other side of that peninsula, in a place called Shichimi, and from there you can see across the Firth, you can see the Japanese Alps. So it's a pristine and very beautiful place, and right on the water. Well, 3 weeks after I buy both places, they have the largest earthquake that region has seen in 1,000 years. Actually, I think it was 3,000 years. But anyway, and so now they've found out that the whole peninsula is crisscrossed by faults, and they don't know whether this was the big one or whether there'll be more. So, I can tell you that Akia is this extremely interesting space. It's also a bit like playing a video game.
You don't get to play on God mode either.
Yes, that's right. Definitely not on God mode. So I think the houses are still standing. Geology accounts for a lot of in survival in Japan. And, I have a house here in Tokyo, and, we had the soil tested, not the soil, but the seismic stability of the ground. And I only picked a place which would survive an earthquake. And when I pick my offices, I also only pick places which are stable and are built on rock or are up reasonably high. So, there will be a big one in Tokyo sooner or later. And while we can't escape the damage factor, we can escape death if we do the right thing. So in finding these Akia, basically, I tried to find places where it looked like it would be reasonably stable. Of course, we review the disaster maps that each of the towns prepare and so on. So not to put people off Akia, but, my first foray has been a little bit wobbly, let's say. And I want to go see these houses to see whether they're still standing. I believe they are, because I can see them from space, through the Bosai, the disaster satellite that the Japanese government runs.
Okay.
But I can't tell whether or not they're pancaked or whether they're still standing, because it's a satellite, right? I can see the roof. The roof is definitely there, but I can't actually tell whether there's anything underneath it. I suspect there is, because I can see other houses around, and also in a couple of the villages, I've heard that they weren't badly impacted, even though they got a good shaking. And by the way, the places that I'm buying, they're all in the 80 to 100-year range.
Okay.
So just a little bit pre-war or during the war. So they use good materials. And of course, they're kominka, right? Or kominka style. So no nails and, lots of dovetailing of joints and stuff like that. So I think probably, as I tell Lester, if these places are standing, they'll withstand anything.
Yeah.
Because that was a Shindo 7. That earthquake was a Shindo 7. That is the top of the Japanese shaking scale. And, everybody looks at the Richter scale. Richter scale means nothing unless you are measuring the shaking on the surface. So, when you see a Richter 7, which is kind of serious, you need to ask yourself, is it within 10 kilometers of the surface of the ground? And if it is, the shaking is going to be pretty severe. And in the West, we use a scale for shaking called the Mercalli scale.
Okay.
In Japan, they use the Shindo scale. They talk about stone lanterns falling over and being able to stand or not stand, that kind of thing. So Shindo 7 is the top end of the scale, and that was a Shindo 7.
Okay.
So in one of the towns, very close to where one of my houses is, 90% of the houses either were collapsed or were damaged.
Mm.
Yeah. So that was pretty severe. Anyway, if they're still standing, this is a good thing, right? So Akia too, I have an architect for a reason. And basically, Japan is a great place to pick up cheap real estate in great locations. And okay, they're going to have an earthquake. Well, I'm from New Zealand originally. We have lots of earthquakes there too. So, and as does the west coast of the US. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you do have to be prepared.
Yep.
So, and just, what Akia 2 is going to be doing, why I call it 2, first of all, is version 2, right? And there are lots of people who are doing a really great job as handyman or handywoman, basically fixing their houses. And I can't compete with that. But as an asset class, I don't see anybody regarding Akia as an asset class.
Mm.
And there are lots of opportunities with Akia, especially if you're also involved in tourism.
Mm.
Right. And so, I have a steady flow. JapanTravel hits about 4 million people a month through our website and through our social media. And we don't really do a lot with those people. Of course, we sell them custom tours, and we're doing thousands of people a year. But nonetheless, we have no assets that we promote ourselves.
Okay.
So, of course, I want to do that with my places, but I'm also planning to do it with other people's places as well.
That was going to be my question. Yeah.
Yeah. So the key to this is, where are those Akia going to be? And most people want a return on their Akia, right? So, they basically say, we want like 5% return or 7% return or something like that. Okay. And so it needs to be somewhere where there are people. So that is fine, but it does mean that Akia is going to be somewhere on the outskirts of Tokyo or Osaka or Fukuoka or whatever. That is not part of my personal mission. My personal mission is to promote regional parts of Japan and revitalize them.
Okay.
So we've got to do something a little bit more than just, intersect the flow of people. We need to actually create a flow of people. And so from that point of view, we have to create content and things for people to do. And we need to give them a way of getting around. So, my plan is, as I refurbish Akia, I'm just going to provide a car free of charge. Because, I can get a car at auction for 500,000 yen. And, okay, maybe they'll prang it. So, okay, maybe I need them to have insurance. But apart from that obvious risk factor, you could use that car for 2 or 3 years before it's not worth anything anymore. And you can amortize that across an awful lot of holidays. And for people to have a free car, well, there's no license required. You're not renting it. And so, everybody's happy, basically. So then suddenly they can go to remote areas. And, some of the best parts of Japan, nobody goes there. Even the Japanese don't go there. One of the 3 most famous, least visited places in Japan is Kochi in Shikoku, which is one of my favorite places. And why don't any Japanese go there? Because it's hard to get to, unless you have a car. And then if you have a car, it's expensive because you have to take the expressway and so on. But if you were to fly there and then pick up a car at the airport, and it's free, and then basically drive all over the prefecture while basically staying in Akia, which wouldn't be an Akia anymore, then, you can have a really great holiday. And they have great beaches there. The food is fantastic. You've got the Iyo Valley just up the road in Kaga. So, it's a fantastic place, but, no one goes there.
Yeah, I found out I was here during the whole decade of the 90s, and I was here when DaiJob.com started up.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where I first heard of you. But uh, so I remember taking vacations, and I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't think of getting a car. And I remember taking a vacation in Japan where you would have to take a train out of the city, wait a half hour for a bus, and that would take you up to the
Yeah,
pension.
it's painful.
Yeah, it was
They're
really
painful.
hard. And tourism, people would ask me in kind of in a funny way, why did you come to Japan? And I thought they were asking me, like, are you into anime? Are you into martial arts? Are you into the food? But they would kind of ask in a funny way, like, why did you come to Japan? Because it was expensive. Houses are smaller than where I'm from. It gets really hot in the summer. And by the way, we're expecting a hot summer this year too. But I
Yeah.
remember going to what I would consider tourist spots, and there was really nothing set up. Like there were no postcards. There were souvenirs, but it was something you'd get for a Japanese person.
Yeah.
Now, of course, today there's so much more. I mean, you go to Shibuya, Akihabara, Shinjuku, there are lots of places to get souvenirs from Japan. But in the 90s, it seemed like people didn't consider Japan a tourist destination.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. It really wasn't. I mean, you had 17, 18 million Japanese going abroad every year, and maybe 5 or 6 million people coming to Japan. In fact, I remember Japanese government wringing its hands because there were more people going to South Korea than Japan.
Mm,
So, how the world has changed in the last 10 years is amazing.
yeah. And I remember before the pandemic, I remember being in Ginza. And I've been to been to Hong Kong, been to China very briefly. Sorry, my screen just told me we have 10 minutes to go. So, and I know you probably got another meeting coming up. So
I
uh,
do, yeah.
we'll be brief. And I hate long goodbyes. So we'll be just a couple more minutes of your time. I appreciate
No,
it.
no, no, that's cool. I'm good until just before 5.
Thanks. Thanks. I just remember going to Ginza in 2019. And, if you've been to Hong Kong and China and you see the different styles, well, the clothing they were selling in the stores in Ginza was really geared toward the Chinese tourists. And so I noticed that had changed quite a lot since the 90s. And they had staff who spoke Chinese. They had announcements in the airport and train stations and stuff in, Japanese and Chinese and English. And on the train, you see they have when the next station coming up, they have it in Korean, but in Chinese, they have it in English and Japanese. So Japan's become a lot more tourist friendly, and the omotenashi, the hospitality culture, is so strong that I think it's a really great time to be in the tourism industry. I was joking earlier. I didn't want to make didn't want to be too harsh, but saying what a great time to be in tourism. But now I think is the time. So
Yeah, well, I would say that travel is one of the few bright industries in Japan right at the moment. I mean, obviously, tons of money going into building chip factories and so on, which is, good because after all, if Taiwan gets invaded by China, those Taiwanese companies got to produce somewhere, and Japan certainly has the discipline and the resources to do it. But GDP wise, if we hit 31 million people this year, the spend is probably going to be around about $40 billion. So that'll be roughly 1% of GDP. Now,
mm,
1% of GDP is about the same as a auto spare parts industry. So it's not huge, but it's come from nowhere because of COVID to that state in just 2 years. And if we have a similar rate of growth to the 60 million target that the government wants by 2030, then it's reasonable to expect it'll be more like 3 or 4% of GDP.
mm,
Now, it's not just the percentage of GDP directly; it's also the indirect contribution as well. And I was reading a little while ago that the indirect contribution is probably a factor of 5 to 1, or 1 to 5. So that means roughly about 5% of downstream companies that service that sector obviously also contributing to GDP. And inbound tourism is an export, not an import.
I got to think
Because it
about that
earns,
one. Yeah.
yeah, because it earns foreign exchange.
Okay.
So just like auto parts, when they send them abroad and sell them there, well, a tourist coming in is exactly the same as sending a wrench to Malaysia, as far as the balance of payments are concerned. So this is money coming in, and when you think about it, all of these tourists who are coming in, okay, 30 million. How much in the way of public works, how much in the way of social expenditure has been made to accommodate all that extra money that came in? The answer is almost nothing. It's free money. There's no investment for what is being received. So it's incredible.
We already have bullet trains. We already have hotels.
Right. The infrastructure, I mean, this country is built for 150 million people. I mean, I think the government at one point thought they might get 150 million people, so they just kept building bridges and roads and infrastructure and whatever. So even our sewage is, easily in excess of what it actually handles. So, these people can come in. Okay, some get sick, some have to go into jail, but the amount of social impact and certainly the amount of infrastructure cost that's been spent on these people is almost nothing. So it's an incredible freebie for the Japanese government. And especially when you get tourists dropping $2,000 or $3,000 on experiences, for example, right? Not just product, because product has inputs that might go to other countries, like they make the product in China and then package it in Japan or whatever. But when it comes to experiences, all of those experiences are enjoyed with real people paying real tax in Japan. And that's the great thing about non-Chinese tourists, because Chinese tourists are also fine, don't get me wrong, but they like shopping, right? Like you mentioned. Not that other tourists don't like shopping, but they, per head, per, nationality, they spend way more on experiences than your average Chinese person does. And so diversity of where these people are coming from is very, very important. And how they're spending the money is very important, because it really makes a huge contribution to the economy. And, as a result, we have more geisha, more mica, we have more Fuji tour guides, all these people who otherwise wouldn't have jobs. Instead, they'd be working for some factory or whatever. So I think tourism has a really huge a role to play in the future of Japan. And in particular, like I was saying before, I want to divert some of the flow out to the countryside, because there's nothing worse than a family having to abandon their ancestral home because they can't get work.
Yeah.
So that, they have to come to Tokyo or they have to come to Osaka or something like that. That's really sad. And these three houses that I got in Noto, they're in three separate villages.
Okay.
They're all 100 kilometers apart because that's a cycling distance. I'm a cyclist.
Okay.
So I'm the first foreigner to buy into each one of those three villages. And the average age of these villages, well, one of them, there's one family with children out of 50 families. And that family actually came from Tokyo about 5 years ago. Everybody else is over 75, 80 years old. Just unbelievable. So literally in the next 10 years, many of these villages will just literally die out.
Yeah.
So that's a fantastic opportunity.
I've seen news stories of schools closing, and the last two high school kids graduating, and it's a very bittersweet event because they're graduating and they can move to Tokyo, and
That's right. That's right. I was showing a high school that is vacant in Ishikawa-ken, just south of Wajima. It's on a promontory. It's beautiful. It's in a forest.
Okay.
Brand new school. Well, brand new. It's about 12 years old.
Okay.
It was used. It was used, I think, for 5 years, and it's been vacant ever since. And no one can think of how to use it.
Wow.
So it's got a huge gym. It's got a massive field out the front. Of course, it's public land, so
Okay.
it's not like we can buy it. But
Hmm.
I've been really putting a lot of thought into how I might, just take a 30-year lease and turn it into something,
Sure.
whatever that might happen to be. Right now, it might have to be for evacuees, but
Yeah. Hmm.
uh, but they have the land there to do it. So I mean, it actually could even do that. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So anyway, the point being that, to your point, there are all these public facilities which are just sitting there
Mm.
gathering dust, and they're perfect for tourism of
Yeah.
various sorts. Mm.
First thing I go to is events. I mean, what kind of event can you have there? Um, I know
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know
right.
specifically, but I've heard talk of people, since I do online content in addition to my law practice. um, I know of people who have created almost like a YouTube house, a streamer house, where they have several studios set up in a row where people can come in and film. So that's one thing people are doing. So Zoom is telling me we have a minute to go. So I want to
Okay.
thank you for your time. It's been very
Yeah,
enlightening.
sure.
I love to hear the thought process of an entrepreneur, because I'm not one. But it's been great to talk to you, and you know, I would say best of luck, but I mean, I think you got it. So
Yeah, well, I still need luck, don't worry. So I
okay, well then,
appreciate
best of luck.
the
Best of
greetings.
luck, and I appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time, Terry. All right,
Great.
have an
Thanks,
awesome day.
JC. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks.